Hey all! On this episode of the Fighter Tales podcast, we were joined by our fellow YouTuber and aviation historian Lord Hardthrasher. As of late, he's been putting out a running series on the 8th Air Force and World War II, and I figured he would be the perfect guy to come on and talk about Apple Plus's Masters of the Air. Just a heads up, I did have a few audio hiccups in the recording, so you'll hear some background noise. Sorry about that. But that being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Whoa, we are in.
Hi, Jordan.
Howdy.
Howdy. Excellent. The only slight hitch here that I can spot so far is we've lost our host.
I had to add myself to stage, my bad. Okay, so...
Hey, Falcon. Good start. That I think is a sign of a quality podcast when the host isn't actually on the line.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, we have nothing but professionalism here on the Fighter Tales podcast. Once again, joined by me, Falcon, and Jordan. And today we have a special guest of ours. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, sir?
Hello. My name is Lord Hardthrasher, 15th Earl of Hambridge, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Oh, we're definitely happy to have you here. Today we're actually going to be going over the new television series that is currently on Apple Plus, Masters of the Air, a mini-series similar to Band of Brothers covering the actions of the 8th Air Force during World War II. And it's based on a pair of books, Masters of the Air, of course, and I think Wing It a Prayer by... hold on a second. I spaced on his first name. I wanted to call him Bing Crosby, but no. His name is Harry Crosby. Also, fair warning, folks. There will be a lot of spoilers in this. We're three gentlemen who were very passionate about military aviation history, and we're going to be talking a little in depth about what we think of the show, and we'll cover some imperfections, things we thought were good. And, this is only covering the first two episodes because as of now, episode 1 and 2 are out. Episode 3 is coming out this Friday, so you'll probably be seeing this after that comes out, but we'll go from there.
It occurs to me we're doing it totally the wrong moment because actually episode 3 and 4 are released tomorrow as we record this. So we probably should have waited, but hey, I'm excited about the show.
I am as well. I thought they were coming out Fridays. Oh, interesting. My bad.
Sorry, you're quite right. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's the 2nd they come out, so we're recording on the 31st, so you're quite right.
Yes, we are currently the 31st, the last day of January. Make sure you get all of your YouTube affairs in order, gentlemen, so you can get paid out for the next month.
Sure.
Is that a thing for you guys?
Oh, yes.
I mean,
okay.
Well, I mean,
theoretically,
yeah. I mean, Lord Hardthrasher did a very, very good job this month. I would imagine. But
can I say, as a proud citizen of the United Kingdom, it delights me no end to be paying tax to the U.S. government.
It all goes full circle,
I assume this is just payback for the whole paper thing, and for which I can only apologise.
Hey, you know what? It's all under the bridge now.
Well, strictly speaking, it's in Boston Harbor, but yes, fine.
Okay, so anyway, Masters of the Air is based directly on the Masters of the Air novel done by Donald Miller a few years back. Like I said before, it is following the conventions of Band of Brothers and HBO's The Pacific, done by Tom Hanks, and he's back again for this fantastic series, which is I think it's very good so far. Whether it stays this good is yet to be seen, but we'll be soon to find out. What are your general impressions of the show, you guys?
Go on, Jordan. You answer that.
I'm enjoying it. I mean, I also ascribe to the very, I think like typically in the history enthusiast sphere, most people are very critical. It's like we watch Hollywood productions with like pen and paper and like noting down all the inaccuracies and discrepancies that we see. Like the more time I've spent reading and studying these things and like being immersed in it with my day job and whatnot, with regards to like military aviation and the military in general, the less time I actually catch myself doing that. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. So like at this point, when it comes to a lot of historical inaccuracies or things like it's not really what I'm looking for. So with that being said, I really enjoyed the first two episodes of Masters of the Air. I also enjoyed the 1990 Memphis Belle movie, which I know gets a lot of flack, no pun intended, by people of our ilk.
See what you did there. See what you did there.
Yeah, that was intense. You were waiting on that one, Jordan.
Yeah, you held that line for a long time.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
funny because it gets a lot of flack because like in real life, the Memphis Belle didn't get flack on its 21st mission, right? So-
Right. It was a milk run. Yeah, it was over France or something.
yeah. But I do like, part of me, I like that the dad from Band of Brothers is the pilot. I like that one scene in that movie where they play and sing Amazing Grace. I can't tell if the music's supposed to be diegetic or not at the mission preparation scene, but like I love how it's done. And 8-9-year-old me would like watch that scene and then rewind and watch it again, because I was like, man, that was so cool. Like there were like I kind of liked the this is a list of everything that could possibly go wrong in a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress aspect of that movie, even though it wasn't super accurate. But
It
like,
was, yeah.
yeah, like it felt it nailed what I perceived the vibe to be, if that makes sense.
It was basically compressing every experience, every bad experience of the 8th Air Force into one mission.
It's like Fury, but
Yeah.
instead of Sherman tanks, it's Flying Fortresses.
Yes.
Well,
No.
yes, I think I go the other way around. I think Fury is the Memphis Belle of tank movies, right?
Damn.
and that's fair.
And I there's a very fine balance. I think in like you're going to go and do something which is supposed to be mainstream entertainment,
Right.
and a film like Memphis Belle hits all of the high notes because it does show you everything, as you say, that could go wrong during the course of a B-17 mission, and you get it, and it's fine, and it doesn't matter that didn't happen to that crew at that time. It happened to other crews at other times, and that's fine. That's okay. If you watch something, the bit that always slightly amuses me is Pearl Harbor is one of the worst movies that's ever been committed to celluloid, and I mean it's objectively terrible film, but some of the most unbelievable scenes are actually what really happened to particular pilots at particular points in time, and it's a crap film. It doesn't tell it well. Whereas what I really liked about this is it's taken real historical fact and turned it into something which is watchable in a very nice way, that somebody that doesn't know anything at all about B-17s or the campaign in the ETO or anything at all could watch that and go, that's a great narrative. And I just think they've done a lovely job of taking real historical fact and turning it into a narrative that you can watch without going, oh, look, now they're loading the bomb load with a particular fuse that was appropriate at the time, and just getting lost in the detail, which can happen so easily. And they've just found that balance so nicely.
You bring up a good point. And that, like, the way that they balance that very, very beautifully. And also, like, for people who are like lost in the sauce when it comes to World War II ETO movies, like the bomber movies almost feel formulaic, right? There's the mission in the beginning and then the big mission where everyone dies or shit goes down, and then at the end they come back and people are safe and everyone's relieved and kissing the ground, right? But like what Episode of the Year has the potential of doing is creating that almost like a psychological thriller feeling of like every mission you see the cast go on could very well be their last.
Yeah.
Because
most
of
definitely.
like every episode is bound to have multiple missions, right? So like, how do you know this one isn't the big one?
Yeah,
And,
I mean
yeah,
that's the kind of vibe. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
crack on.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's how it would have been for the crews too. They would do their 25 missions, sometimes more, and they didn't know waking up at 3 a.m. having a flashlight shine in their face if this would be the quote unquote big one. They didn't know if they were going to end up coming back home. They didn't know if they were going to end up being killed or end up in a Stalag Luft. And then they would do their mission, come back if they were lucky, get back into their racks, and realize they had to do it all over again the next day sometimes.
And they'd been told that prior to deploying that they were going to win the war, and they'd all, certainly at the beginning, and I think what Master of the Air captures very nicely is this feeling that there are a bunch of guys who've all trained together, they've all learned how to fly together, they've all gone to Europe at roughly the same time. Some of them have gone a bit earlier and got a taste for what it's really like, but most of them haven't. They all know one another at this point because there's no replacements yet, and they think they're going to win the war with the next mission. It's just going to take one more and we're done. And it's slowly dawning on them, actually not slowly dawning on, it's dawning on them rapidly that this is a repetitive attritional fight that they're in. And that might be because, the three of us probably know the history well enough to be able to sense that dread and that breaking of naivety. But I think they've handled it really well. I think they've handled it beautifully.
Oh, beautifully so. Yeah, and what really is just a constant reminder in the show is these guys doing these missions are 18, 19, up to 25 generally. And honestly, our core audience on YouTube, if you're listening to this right now, I guarantee you're probably in that age range where you would have been like eligible for this kind of horrible task at hand. And it just I just wanted to convey that, it was awful for literal kids.
And I think what they've done so nicely in this is so if you watch one of the best films ever made, no, not one of the best film ever made, I'm just going to go out on a limb here, which is quite clearly the Battle of Britain from 1969.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's unquestionably the best film ever made. But if you look at the actors that they got in to do that, although people like Michael Caine, for example, we all know him from years and years and years of making films thereafter, but he was still at that point 10 years too old to have been a fighter pilot in the Battle of Britain. He was 32, and most of the guys flying were in their early 20s at their latest. An old man was 27. XOs
Right.
typically 25 to 30.
Yeah.
And if you were 30, you were right on the extreme edge of it. And what I love is they've got either very young actors or actors that look like they're very young to be the crews. And you're looking at boys who clearly don't shave. They didn't, right? They were too young. You're literally taking a 19-year-old and putting him in as skipper of a crew, and giving him that responsibility. You're taking a 22-year-old and saying to him, right, you're a squadron leader now, or a wing leader now, and you've got to go do it. I mean, as an older man, and I'm going to go on a limb here and assume I'm a little bit older than both of you guys, I look at that and go, when I was 22, there is no way in God's green earth you should give me control over my credit card, never mind B-17, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I
spent years paying off my credit card debt that I accrued at the age of 22.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
we've all done it.
Like, if we were to be thrust into a B-17 crew, or just the military service in 1942, Lord Hardthrasher would probably be a Great War veteran, and me and Jordan would be old men.
Oh wow! Okay, dude, you're cutting me. I'm not saying it's not true, but sugar. Okay. And actually, you know what? The slightly terrifying thing is, I'm actually probably slightly too old for that as well.
So like Boer War, or
I probably would have served in the Boer War.
Yeah, he would have been like our age, flying Hawker Hearts in Egypt. You know what I mean?
He got his wings over Zululand.
Wings. My brother in Christ, there were no planes when I started.
I know. I'm just making
I would have been fucking riding into
He would have been a balloon observation officer or something.
That's absolutely right. Yes, balloon observation officer. By the way, I do apologize if I make the occasional swear word. I apologize. I should try and keep it to an absolute minimum.
Me and Jordan swear all the fucking time. It's fine.
Okay, fine. Cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is an insane. It's an insane concept to say you're going to give young men this kind of responsibility and challenge, and so many of them rose to it then. And I love the fact that they've taken younger actors and put them in those key roles. I think that's great. The corollary to that, my slight criticism, and it's absolutely a trope of American films, and I don't know quite why. You've got there's the EXO, can't remember his name, is clearly being portrayed as an alcoholic.
Oh,
He
Bucky.
has
Yeah,
not had
they
time
really
to become
wanted
an
to make him
alcoholic.
feel like the Nixon, like from Band of Brothers, is always
Even
like
worse
that
though,
character.
because yeah, like Nixon was only bad like later on in the series, and truth be told, he did like his drink, and I don't know, I have not read Masters of the Air yet, like the actual book. I probably will after the series is over, but
It's so good, do it.
I can see how one would go down that path, but I don't know if it would be feasible for an EXO to do something along those lines. I don't know. If anybody else knows more about it, please inform me, but don't give us any spoilers because we're still excited about what's to come.
I mean, I think it's worth bearing in mind. Obviously, you're coming into in the States in particular off the back of prohibition and drinking age being 21. A lot of these boys wouldn't have
Just in case, because on our end you were kind of breaking up a little bit, Lord Harthrasher. He was basically just saying, you really didn't have much access to alcohol because most bases were dry. I mean, you could get a few beers here and there, but it wasn't like you would be going out drinking every night, like Right Stuff style.
Not like the
And,
RAF, who definitely did go
No.
getting pissed every night.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, fair enough. They've been dealing with this shit since 1939, so
We're doing it for a while.
yeah. So on that note, let's delve into episode 1 specifically. Starts off in the United States. They're getting ready to fly over to their bases in England, and we've got our two main characters, Buck and Bucky. One of the most interesting things about that depiction of them getting over to England is the stop over in, I think it was Greenland.
Yeah.
And you never really see that kind of thing in most media depicting the bombers. Like they had it wasn't just like a straight shot across the Atlantic. They had to make stops along the way, and they would sometimes have awful conditions getting down. I imagine some crews could have been lost even in just the transit across the Atlantic.
They've actually made it less bad than it was in the film, in the first episode, because the particular airbase that they're depicting was actually the end of a fjord. So you had to radio ahead and ask whether the weather was clear, because if you went in to go and try and put the bomber on the ground and the weather was bad, you did not have room to pull up off the runway before you hit the mountain behind it. So
That's
these
pretty
kids who are
rough.
still learning their jobs, albeit with unladen B-17s, had to fly down this fjord, and once you're in, you're committed. So you have to land or you hit the mountain.
Oh, jeez.
And I know why they didn't do that, because it makes it look stupid and over dramatic, but that was actually the case. It was that Greenland route was flipping horrible. And after a while, they figured out this was dumb, and they actually wound up going south, and they went Brazil to the Azores, and up that way.
Okay. That's really interesting. I actually like to see them depict that later on, but I doubt they will because they'll already be in theater. So
they've got that bit done, right? They've only got 1 episode.
Yeah. But I do appreciate them depicting that because it was a very treacherous thing to do. Getting fresh, Army Air Corps crews into the most trying flying conditions right before they go into hell over occupied Europe.
And there's a nice bit in there where they've got a crashed B-17 at the end of the runway, as kind of as an homage, because it did happen, right?
I didn't know that.
Okay, so watch it. If you rewatch it, you'll see as they come in, and I can't remember if it's Buck or Bucky because I've got confused now too. But as he's coming in the background, there's a crashed B-17.
Huh.
That's pretty great.
That's a nice touch. Yeah. That's attention to detail that not a lot of shows have.
Well, it's funny because I feel like this Masters of the Air does a thing where there's a lot of really minute attention to detail, I guess just little tiny details that most audiences aren't going to notice. And even then, I know Kyle, you and I talked about this briefly on Twitter, but in the episode where they're attacked by BF-110s and they're called out as Ju-88s, misidentification was actually a real thing, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like some viewers may see that misidentification and be like, "Wow, the show made a mistake."
Absolutely. There are a few obvious things that are a little wrong when Crosby's giving one of his narrations about one of the ground crewmen. He's wearing Master Sergeant stripes, and I did some research. He was actually a Master Sergeant in real life. They call him a corporal, which was that's a very simple thing for this kind of, I don't know, this kind
So
of
the costume,
accurate show. Yeah.
the costume did it correct, but the narration was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. The narration was absolutely wrong. Oh, what was his
Huh.
name? He's in
I know the
episode
guy you mean.
2.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, when he's playing with the British kids, the one. What's really actually sad is one of the British kids is missing a hand, probably from the Blitz or something. But, what's his name?
Pass
Lemons.
the week.
Lemons.
Lemon. Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
Lemons is not a corporal. He is, as depicted, a Master Sergeant. He's one of the head maintenance guys, crew chiefs, for the 100th bomb group, and I don't know why they made that error. He
Well,
obviously
so
would have been a corporal at one point, but
I doff my cap to thee, sir. As your level of nerd, I had completely missed that. So well done.
oh, thank you. I mean, well, you probably also know, British ranking conventions over American and whatnot. I would imagine.
Do you know what? It's one of the things I fall down on really badly. Is I know RAF ones, but you ask me to do Army ones, and I get confused, which is bad because
So
I really should know.
what's really interesting about American and British stripe conventions is they're pretty much the same, but the British have theirs pointing downwards, whereas Americans flipped theirs over after the American Civil War.
Oh yeah, and you guys have weird up and down chevrons. I mean,
Oh,
guys,
yes, we
pick
do.
a side.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
just pick
chevron.
one.
Yeah,
and go with
yeah, we
it. I
do.
mean, what the hell?
My brother in Christ, we have like 10 fucking stripes going in each direction.
Right, guys, seriously, 1, 2, 3 officer. Well, I suppose you get warrant officer, but fine, whatever. Put a crown on it.
Yeah. Oh,
Bench
I
roots.
mean, I would say put a star on it, but
A crown, but yeah, fine.
but yeah, it's really interesting how accurate they get in a lot of details in the show. But like that corporal thing just really stood out to me. I was like, wait a minute, how did they fuck that up? Because that's like 6 ranks apart.
And I think I've listened because I'm a giant nerd to some of the guys making the making of series bits of it and people talking about it, and they went to such lengths to, for example, get the particular variations that the characters that they're portraying actually used in real life in their uniforms. You'll notice, for example, there are a couple of different colored ties that people are using, because those people had older ties or newer ties because they'd been in the Air Force for less or more time. And I was blown away that they did that. I was like, that's so cool.
As a
So I'm disappointed
reenactor,
with the
that
stripes thing.
Yeah, the stripes thing is just like, it's so weird because it's so obvious. But the ties I did notice in episode 1, Buck, he's got, I think he's got a chocolate tie, and that was a pre 1941 regulation tie, and after 41 they switched over to the tan ties, and I'm sure I've got some reenactors in this viewership who would
that
appreciate that.
The fittings for the costumes was asked the question, how many costumes did you fit? And she said, I stopped counting at 3,000.
Wow.
Holy shit.
Wow.
Like, it's a 9-episode series. That's insane.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because most of the central cast is officers for the first time in this entire trilogy of World War II sagas. When they all would have had fitted uniforms, because enlisted uniforms were not fitted. You would just get like small, medium, large, etc., based on like, your chest size. Officers' uniforms, they would get a general pattern for, and then they would go and get them tailored.
It's not in Master of the Air, but it's one of my favorite facts about the US appearance in the United Kingdom. When later in the war, they recognized that flak wounds were a serious issue. So you needed some kind of protection. And they literally gave them what we would think of today as flak jackets, but actually they were made of chainmail.
Mhm.
They're like, well, who the hell makes chainmail? So they're in England, and they went to Wilkinson Sword, who make swords for the king at the time,
Oh
Queen,
man,
more
I
recently
see where
No
this
King
is
now.
way.
going.
And Wilkinson Sword produced their flak jackets, made of chainmail, and all the helmets and all the rest of it, literally taking patterns from, ceremonial armor. And you go, oh God, Jesus, how inept and all the rest of it. It reduced flak wounds by 58%. And the
That's
RAF,
incredible.
being the RAF,
Oh my
went,
god.
oh, we're not doing that. And my God, seriously, give our kids a chance. And in particular, of course, one of the areas that they managed to protect quite effectively was the ghoulies. Because guess what? Flak comes upwards. And what do young men care about? It's their ghoulies. Um,
For all of my American viewers, he's talking about balls.
Yeah.
There's actually a really interesting point in episode 2 where one of the bombardiers, puts a helmet down under his crotch, and it's like, you
Yep.
know what? I'd probably do the same thing. And I didn't know that about the chainmail thing. It's almost like if Rupp Price Glory or At the Front started making military equipment for a modern military. That's
100%, right?
crazy.
And 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 it gave it's one of the saddest facts is when they were going into these box barrages which they began to face. So as the Germans began to learn that the B-17s wouldn't turn during the course of an attack, they created box barrages over an estimated height so that they wouldn't have to fire at a particular bomber. They'd fire at an area that the
Right.
bombers were going to fly into, and you put enough flak up there. So initially they were using about 8,000 rounds to bring a bomber down, and by doing that they brought it down to about 1,500. It's still a lot, but it's less. So you were getting a lot of flak damage, and it is coming up. And you're a young man, and like genuinely, you're a young man. Often you're stood up if you're the nav or a gunner, and you're worried about what's going to come up literally between your legs, and you don't want to be unmanned by this stuff. So you would go and find your helmet, you would go and find a bit of armor plating, and you would try and stand on it or sit on it. And that, when I read that, honestly, I teared up a bit. I was like, flipping heck, guys,
Yeah.
that's hardcore.
Around this time, German guns weren't just directed by opticals. I mean, so you
No.
would have a pretty rudimentary radar guided gun sight that would give you ranging, and then from there you would line your optics up and hit the group, and it was a very indiscriminate sort of barrage they would do, and it would just be a cloud of flak that would detonate almost simultaneously and just punch holes into these bombers from below, the side, above, every which angle. But the guys were wanting to protect the jewels,
Well, you don't think as a young man, I'm going to lose a foot or an arm. You think, I want to be capable.
Right.
Um, and
Like, even if you lose an
this
arm, you
is-
can still get a nut,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trust me, with enough questions, you can still get laid with one arm. It's not a big problem.
Yeah. I think it was Apocalypse Now. They had a similar scene when they're all riding in on the helicopters, and the cavalry guys who are the door gunners and whatnot, they're putting their helmets underneath their, they're sitting down on them and stuff. It's just a very telling thing that it's been going back even to World War II. You've got guys sitting on their helmets, just bringing up plates, like you said, and that chainmail that you mentioned is just such a comfort thing for them.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Gives them confidence.
Yeah, and you would need it. 30,000
You would.
feet, you're looking down through a Norden bomb sight, which probably isn't going to hit shit. Probably cloud cover over the target, which I really appreciated in episode 1. The first bombing raid they did, they had to cancel. They just cut it and ran, even though they lost three B-17s, because that happened a lot.
It certainly did, and it did happen at Bremen the first time they went in, and I sort of appreciated, again, it's a minor criticism just because I'm a history nerd.
Sure.
The Bremen raid was a very small raid designed to go to Germany, knowing that they weren't ready to go to Germany because they had to go to Germany as quickly as possible. And then they didn't go again basically until, I'll get my dates wrong. But I mean, the first big raid was Schweinfurt. right? That was the first
Yeah.
big long distance penetration raid. And so you go from Bremen in end of 42 to basically August 43 before they went back to Germany.
Yeah, because they got the shit shot out of them when when they went over Germany the first time back in 42. They just the
Well,
attrition was so bad, and they had no fighter cover. It was a mess.
they just didn't have enough bombers. I mean, the insane thing with the whole of the build up of the 8th is it starts so small, and then it was going to progress and become bigger, but because of Torch, so Operation Torch, the landings in North Africa,
Mhm.
and the need to go and support that campaign, and then the invasion of Italy, and well, Sicily and then Italy, what had supposed to be very large scale reinforcement of the 8th Air Force to go and bomb Germany actually slowed down to a trickle. There were really from June 42 to November 42, there were no reinforcements at all coming into the UK. It was all going to Africa. So they just didn't have the planes to do it. And I think Bremen was 60. I want to 60, 70 aircraft, something like that.
In the show, it was depicted as just like 3 flights of like 8. It felt like a very small raid compared to what you see in like Memphis Belle. You know, it was
Sure.
a small package. Like the one section that ended up getting really wrecked by fighters, which was a very good depiction of fighter threats. It was only like 5 or 6 guys, or 5 or
Yeah, I
6
think it was
bombers.
like
Up to 6
five
bombers, yeah.
planes per section, or like 6 planes per section, or something.
Yeah, and they just got ruined immediately when the fighters went through. They just ripped through them, and it was a very honest and rather gory depiction of it. Which
Their
I
depiction of
appreciate.
shrapnel, I thought was really accurate.
Yes,
Yeah.
That was really, really cool, because like you rarely see shrapnel like ripping through airplanes the way that it was shown in Masters of the Air.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And there's a bit where a ball turret gunner, the belly gunner,
Mhm.
gets a piece of shrapnel landing next to his head, and you might be inclined to go, oh, fucking hell, Hollywood, of course it has to land next to his head. No. That genuinely happened to that crew at that time. And he genuinely wound up with a bit of shrapnel buried next to his head.
And it
And
makes
you're
sense
like,
too, because that's where the armor actually was, because the armor was actually behind the crewman. It was all aluminum and or plexiglass in front of him. So behind him, they had a little section of steel armor. That's just how the Sperry Ball turret was set up, and that's where the shrapnel ended up landing. Sorry, I totally cut you off, but go ahead.
no, absolutely right. I mean, I was merely going to comment that this is punishment for short people, and justified, frankly.
Well, to be fair, the Sperry Ball turret was rated for gentlemen up to 6'2", I think.
Yeah, but okay, seriously, my brother in Christ. I mean, if you were 5'9",
Oh, yeah.
5'8", you were too tall to get in the thing. I mean,
I've tried. Believe me. I on the movie Memphis Belle it was up in Geneseo for a bit, and I looked into the ball turret and I was like, no.
no.
I'm a guy who's 6'3". I don't know what that is in meters, maybe like 2 meters.
No, I speak feet in height.
Okay.
We're very
So-
confused. Like, we're very, very confused people, and we all try and yeah. I'm with you. Feet, fine, no problem.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I looked into that and I'm like, there's no fucking way I'm getting my knees up to my jaw.
Right.
It's just not going to
doing
happen.
that for like 8 hours in that
Oh, yeah.
condition. I mean,
Yeah.
how the hell do you do that?
Did the ball turret gunner actually stay in the ball turret? My assumption, like I always thought that they were hanging on in the fuselage, and then they got into the ball turret when they got over like the bombing zone or the target.
It depended. I mean, like if you crossed the English Channel and got over France, that's when you would get in. Because in episode 1, we see the navigation error, and immediately when you're going over the coast of France, you would get flak. So, especially in the early days, you would get in the ball right as you're going over the coast.
Okay.
And stay in that ball until you hit your target and came back, and only then will you get out. So that's probably 6 hours.
Well, if you think, if you think Schweinfurt, when the fighter escort peeled off, so in the August raid, when the fighter escort peeled off, they had 4 hours to go to the target. Sorry, 4 hours there and back from the target, so 2 hours each way.
Jesus.
yeah, it was not a fun time. Like, imagine being in a fetal position as an adult.
I
Maybe
can't
you
even
haven't
cross my
like.
legs comfortably.
Also, like psychologically, I mean, back to what we talked about a minute ago. And I don't want to bang on about this, but
No, by all means.
if you're in the ball turret and you're in that position, you've got feet roughly a shoulder's width apart on the turret controls, left and right, and then
Mhm.
obviously you've got up and down. You're kind of sat there with, frankly, your legs akimbo, with you and 30,000 feet to the ground, and some angry man in an FW-190 trying to kill you, who's basically going to be aiming for your testicles first. Um,
Yeah.
and that's not a great deal of fun, I would suggest.
No. No, not at all. And plus, you're on oxygen. If you're lucky, you can bring your parachute with you, but otherwise, you just have a simple little, canvas strap holding you in place in case the ball breaks open.
Sure.
And it was just, it was shit. And I will say the attrition of ball turret gunners was not any more than a waist gunner or a tail gunner, but
No,
it was just unpleasant to be in.
I think with B-17 generally was quite a survivable platform compared to a lot of the other planes that were being flown.
Sure.
So you kind of lived and died as a crew, barring flak broadly or cannon shells coming through the fuselage. But you by and large either all got out or didn't.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, once the plane gets into a spin or
Yeah.
departs and just loses control, it starts breaking up immediately. It would be very quick, which is not something you really see in Memphis Belle or previous iterations of World War II bomber combat.
Well, actually, so you know how they had that crash landing sequence, or actually they had like a couple crash landing
That was
sequences
yes,
Yeah.
where they
yeah.
actually all got into the middle of the airplane in their bracing positions. I thought that was really cool.
That was a nice touch. Yeah. Well, if you look at
Totally
Memphis
agree.
Belle, they do that too. Actually, they don't make a big
Okay.
deal out of it, but they do that too. Like most of them circle around Danny, the radio operator, and you've got the navigator who is he's going through a midlife crisis as you do, and he cranks the wheel down, and everybody bounces to life, and everything's all nice and happy, but they're all clustered in the area around the radio room because
Okay.
that's the easiest way to get out.
I need to
But Jordan,
rewatch that movie. But like I did
You
notice
should.
that they removed the window from the top of the
Yeah.
airplane.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, Jordan, I think you're absolutely right. I thought that was a lovely touch
Oh yeah,
that they showed the proper crash, because in Memphis Belle they don't, but
Right.
in this they show the actual crash and brace positions, and all the guys sat down on the floor, braced
right.
together. Just thought it was a lovely touch, and how fucking terrifying. You might be coming in to land in Manston or somewhere in England, and it's a friendly base at least, but how terrifying that would be, because these planes were not safe before any bastard decided to try and shoot you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. What was
and
nice is
removing
that
those
they,
crash panels, right? How do you get out quick? Well, you make
yeah,
sure you can egress fast if you have to.
it was almost like they knew the audience would have seen Memphis Belle before this, and they were trying to bait him into getting really, really worried. So when they
Sure.
did the wheels up landing and they, did the belly landing and whatnot, there was this like really, really big amount of tension where, oh, the plane's gonna explode, because it did happen quite a lot.
Sure.
And it was just a really nice, I don't know, depiction of
Well, and the way that they tried to crank the wheel down and failed because the mechanism had frozen.
yeah. I'm sure that happened a lot too.
Definitely happened. I mean, frozen either because it's temperature or frozen because there's something in there.
Right.
What's really interesting is that my dad was he didn't often fly on C-130s because he was an aerial porter, but he knew a lot about the aircraft because he had to. The C-130 still maintained that wheel crankdown system.
Did it?
Even yes, I think it still has it today. If there are any C-130J crews here, please confirm this. But on the H that he worked on,
I'll text one
taught
right
him.
now.
Oh, you know what? Beautiful. Yeah, on the H that he was on, they learned, hey, if you're on this thing and the wheels aren't coming down, you can crank it down just like a B-17.
Now you see, this is the basic design problem with American aircraft. What you want, there's a nice Blackburn Beverly because you didn't have to crank the wheels down because they never came up. Easy.
Oh shit.
For the audience that may not
Said
have
yes,
looked at the
the-
Blackburn
the-
Beverly,
the,
just quickly Google that, and you will see the joy of 1950s British design. And yeah, the retractable
Oh,
undercarriage. Pfft, what's that?
Awesome.
So my guy responded, he's a Coast Guard C-130 crewman, and the C-130J still does have the hand crank to lower the wheels and the flaps.
So even in the year of our Lord 2024, 80 years after the B-17 was a relevant frontline bomber, we still have cranked down wheels.
So we were chatting before we came on this about like experiences. So back in the day, I did some stuff with the RAF Grand Crew and various bits and pieces because I was going to go and try and go and fly for them, which didn't work out. But by the by, the Hunter Hawk, Hunter Hawk, the Hawk
Hawker.
aircraft, which is what the Red Arrows use today,
Oh, the
has
Bayhawk.
it has a little neat thing. So if you lose hydraulic pressure, you can push a button that explosively drops down the undercarriage, which is really cool. That's great. And then into the airflow to try and get your hydraulics to work, which is basically going to do everything else, all your control surfaces. You get a little tiny mini propeller. It looks like a thing like Pee Wee Herman would have on his head.
You're talking about the Ram Air turbine.
Yeah.
Oh man,
of course had
it's
that.
it's fucking amazing. It pops out into the airflow, and this thing spins round and gives
Mhm.
you. Well, actually, what it probably does is piss out your hydraulic fluid from all the holes you've got. But it's kind of cool. Yeah. Give me a hand crank any day.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's a good backup for something like, so when you're in a single engine plane or a single crewman plane, it's not like you can crank stuff down, but
No.
a turbine it's a good backup, you know. Also,
Well, I mean, in the Spit Mark 1 and Spit Mark 2, you had a hand pump to get the undercarriage down. So you'd literally hand crank it. But it wasn't a crank; it was a pump to get pressure to pneumatic system. So if it didn't go down, you'd have a handle that you pushed up and down.
the F-14
Whilst-
Tomcat, something like that, actually. If
The
there was
Tomcat,
an absolute
really?
Yes, it did. It wasn't for the landing gear. I can't remember what it was for. I think it was just like an auxiliary, just like general hydraulic backup.
Because I mean, a Tomcat notoriously easy to land, with almost really nothing to do other than just put it on the deck, right? Aside for the swing wings, the flap controls, the canopy position, the you've only got 55 things to do at once, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, I'll show it to you in the sim sometime. But yeah, I think especially the early ones. I don't know if the D still had it, but yeah, like in A's and B's, there was a hydraulic hand pump.
Because you know how the 8th Air Force, when they first got like the B-24s that were used in the Pelosi raid,
Yeah,
those were supposed to go to the 8th, and they were taken from the 8th, and they were used in Pelosi instead.
That goes back to the whole like Mediterranean theater thing. Yeah,
right. So like those were supposed. Yeah. So like what Parker Asher was saying earlier about like how they didn't have replacements. Like those were like they were kind of banking on those liberators.
Well, it was actually slightly worse than that because they were the only two groups of liberators that ECA had at the time, and they were.
Oh, so they removed the liberators from the
called.
ETO entirely and brought them to the MTO.
So two of them were pulled, and I'm going to get this slightly wrong because it's been a while since I looked at it, but there were the two groups of liberators that ECA had were sent south, and I think I want to say the 12th, which was the rest of the force, was another 8. But yeah, the only two that he had B-24s at the time were sent south.
Yeah.
So when did they eventually get B-24s back?
Pass. I don't know the exact date they got them back. Well, after Palesti, there weren't many left,
Right,
so you didn't get any of those back. But I mean, this is kind of the point I was making a minute ago. Like the relatively small size. If you look in August, the size of the 8th Air Force you're talking about raids of maybe 100 planes ish. By February of 44, you're talking about raids of 600 ish. That's a massive increase.
Wow.
Oh wow, yeah.
By the time you get to post D-Day raids, let's say 4 or 5 months later, you're talking about raids of 800 aircraft, maybe 900 aircraft of bombers, plus 1,200 fighter escorts. That is an insane rate of growth. I mean,
Oh,
just
absolutely.
it's. I mean, if you're being rude about the American contribution to the war, you can make an argument that the ETO theatre, particularly the 8th, but let's say the 8th and the 15th together, only fight for 18 months, really. It's
On paper,
broadly on paper. But what that misses is this exponential growth in strength. So at the point of Operation Gomorrah, which was Hamburg, the RAF raids on Hamburg, they put 800 aircraft over Hamburg in about 40 minutes, which is at night, with no bomber formations. So if you think about a stream cracking through American, good lord, through German defences, that's insane. And it takes the US 12 months to get to the point where they can do something like that. But then they go from 800 to 1,600 to 2,000 by May 45.
That's incredible.
And they're cranking out a B-24 every 58 minutes out of Willow Run, right? So like
Precisely. That's it. It's Willow Run. Right? It's the production capability of the United States, and at the same time, the skill and the training of the pilots that are going through is still exceptionally high. Whereas if you look at the Luftwaffe's response to try and do the Jagdstab, which is the push to fighters in 44, where you see this big spike going up in the numbers that Speer's producing of fighters to go to the front line, you're getting pilots coming through with 30, 40 hours on the machine. A basically trained US P-51D pilot is coming through with 350 hours, and there are 2,000 of them. There are so many pilots, they don't have enough machines to fly, and they're pulling lottery tickets to see who goes and flies on that raid. It's just a qualitative and quantitative difference, and that's why essentially they destroyed the German ability to resist in the air.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, even in, I think it was episode 2. No, it was 1. You only see a handful of fighters coming up against the bombers. It's
Sure.
very minuscule against what you would expect for a proper interceptor defense. Even in 1942,
and I think we'll see that change, right? I think as they go into, I mean, Schweinfurt, there were, call it 400 in the ballpark, 400 Luftwaffe fighters engaged against the Boeings, as the Germans would have called it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a maximum event. And every now and again, Gallant would pull together enough fighters to be able to really go and hammer a raid. But that's as many as it got. And then from, let's say, October 44, no, earlier than that, June, July 44, they were in no position to do that again, except very occasionally.
I mean, as ineffective as... Oh, Jordan, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Yeah, okay. Even as ineffective as bombers would have been 42, 43, the moment we started doing the daylight bombing along with the RAF's night bombing, that just taxed the German defenses so much.
Yeah.
That I think it was just over by that point. They would have had to have a 24-hour watch.
Yeah, like that they couldn't not do anything, right?
Exactly.
Like they had to do something. They had to send up their planes They
Yeah.
had to intercept. They had to put their pilots at risk.
That bleeds bleeds them out of fuel, out of personnel, out of ammunition. Like even that alone, I would even go out on a limb to say that might have been more effective than the daylight bombing campaign. Just the fact that we were up there.
Oh no. I mean, 1000%. So if you look at, forgive me, I'm going to get really nerdy on here, so forgive me, guys. But so if you look at the moment that Schweinfurt 2 ends in October 43, something like half of the 8th Air Force is destroyed in the preceding 8 weeks, and on that raid, it had to stop. So they paused. Bad weather rolled in, gave Ika some breathing room. Hap Arnold fires him, brings in Doolittle in January 44, and Doolittle immediately goes right to the fighters and people like Zemska, and we goes, fuck trying to stay close to the bombers. Your job is to destroy the enemy fighters, because if we destroy the enemy fighters, we can bomb whatever the hell we want, but you've got to kill the fighters. So don't stay close to the bombers. They'll do what they'll do. You guys go ahead, go behind, go above, go below, whatever you need to do. Your job is to destroy the Luftwaffe fighters. And so from February, in big week, middle of Feb, they get a few days of clear weather. They launch a thing called Operation Argument, and they go and absolutely nail the Luftwaffe by going to target places that they have to come up and defend. So you're forcing the Luftwaffe to fly, and you're shooting them down with far superior, much more skilled fighter pilots in better kit, and you destroy the Luftwaffe fighter capability. If you're sat on a bomber, you're a tethered goat. Your job is not, what you're dropping bombs on is completely irrelevant. And they knew it, by the way, which makes the fact that they went up again and again that much more amazing. But they simply could not go and hit those targets the way that they thought they could before the war. What they were bombing was basically irrelevant, didn't matter. It was just to go and make the Luftwaffe fly and for the fighters to shoot them down. Now, if you're a bomber crew, that's an awful story. But if you're a fighter crew, that's strategically the right thing to do. So weirdly, the bomber war wasn't about bombers, it was about fighters.
And what's really interesting is that despite all the shit that was thrown at the 8th Air Force, they never broke.
No,
they got pretty low, but they never broke. They still went up whenever they were asked to, and they bombed their targets as accurately as they could within, a click or so. And well, they do it all again the next day.
2% within 1,000 yards on average, roughly.
Yeah.
So, okay, so 3 clicks, just about.
The 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah, Georgia, they do a really good presentation, like, of just how the whole, like, I guess, one, I love how that museum is set up, and it's one of the closer museums to where I live currently. So that's always a plus. Yeah, but like, so that they have this thing where like you walk in, and you kind of like sit through like a briefing in like the setup of a Quonset hut, and they kind of, and like their tour guide will like show you or give you like a briefing and also explain to you what the Quonset hut, like what the representation is, and like what all these little like different things do. I remember how there was like a space heater in one. I was like, yeah, like that was a luxury because it got really, really cold in Europe, like in England at times. And there's like a bunch of dudes living in here, and then they take you out on like a kind of like a 4D experience thing where they blow air and they flash lights at you, and they play like an IMAX presentation of like a bombing raid that they recorded. I think they recorded it on Texas Raider, unfortunately. So it's kind of sad, but like they had a bunch of reenactors like playing parts, and then that's kind of when it opens up and you go into the actual museum. But like they definitely like with all the exhibits showing, different aspects of like every squadron, every wing of the 8th Air Force had like its own exhibit, and they kind of tell you, it's like, oh yeah, like these people were doing this thing, and those people were doing this thing. Oh look, here's RAF Alconbury. A giant awful explosion here happened, and that's when they realized they had to start teaching ground crews how to load bombs safely in 1943. Like there's all these things that you realize, whoa, like there's a real human element here, And like, but
Sounds pretty cool.
also the sad thing was these humans were like cogs in the machine, you know,
Sure.
These kids, really.
kid, right?
Yeah.
And like, you know, but like the Eighth Air Force, like as a whole, was being run as a very, very, very efficient machine. And like
So
this 20-year-old waist gunner, who like his job was to cover like the left side of the airplane, right? So the airplane could, you know, drop four bombs and like get the Luftwaffe to come up and shoot at them. But like his job was like, so, you know, in the grand scheme of things, inconsequential, but he would go up and do the same thing every day.
Yeah.
And it did get better, and I'll be really interested to see if Masters of the Air starts to show you the fighters, because that progression is really interesting, and there's a whole story arc there. But there's also a piece where, so if you read Don Miller's book, Masters of the Air, there's a bit where he talks about a pilot that got a home run. So they got shot down, landed in France. I think it's France, maybe Holland. Managed to make it back all the way back to their base in the UK eventually.
Oh my god.
And he gets back to his base, and he's looking for, you know, his bicycle, which has been nicked, his money, which has gone missing, his bedding and clothing had obviously been cleared out and sent home, right, because he's a MIA, and they clear out his room. And he turns back up on base, and he did 23 something missions, something like that. And by the point he gets back again, they're being asked to do 35.
Oh my
because
god.
this is
35?
44.
Oh,
And he's talking
yeah.
to ball turret gunners and side gunners who've never seen a German fighter attack them. And they're getting
Wow.
through their tours in 12 weeks because they're flying every day and there's nothing opposing them.
And then
And
you
then
go
the
home
ME-262
and
turns
everything's
up.
cool. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
And suddenly the R4M rocket turns up, and life becomes jolly uncomfortable again. But
How
yeah,
common was the R4M rocket?
not very.
Okay.
Not very at all. It came in 45. It was a very nasty tool. Prior to that, I mean, you got, frankly, insane stuff like 109s with a single bomb on the bottom of them flying over formation and just dropping it through the formation. That worked.
Oof.
You got ME 110s coming in from the side, firing basically ground attack rockets into the formations, again, because they weren't dodging, because they're trying to create the box.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
That kind of work. But the R4M was an asshole. It was a really nasty air-to-air projectile, really unpleasant.
When it was actually used.
And you could aim it, right? So the ground
Yeah.
attack stuff kind of went where it went. You know, it flew all over the place, and particularly high altitude, you go anywhere. And sometimes it hit, sometimes it missed. But the R4M was a bitch.
So for anyone who doesn't know, the R4M was a radio-controlled rocket. It would have a flare in the ass end of it. You could guide it into a bomber. It would blow up, and it was a very late war tool, but it was the first true air-to-air missile, if you think about it.
Yeah.
But and then you also have the Sonderkommando Elba, who were the ramming guys. They were kind of rare. I'd really like to see if the series covers that later on.
And again, they were pretty rare, right? I mean, actually,
Was
they
the R4M
probably
ended?
operated for about 2 months.
Yeah, it was radio controlled.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about like that weird. Because I thought the R4M was the one that they carried like 8 of them under the wings or something of like a 262.
I think they carried a few of them. I don't know how many they carried.
Oh, you know what?
They
You're right.
carried a few.
I'm thinking of the I think it was the
The
A4.
Fritz? The Fritz
You're talking about
rocket?
Fritz X, I think, which is the radio
Yes,
controlled one.
the R4M was a rocket that was unguided. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about it. It was certainly a thing, and it certainly caused some concern. And you could fire. I mean, the 262 R4M thing is kind of archetypal because it's, you know, jet aircraft and the greatest fighters of World War II. But it was incredibly rare in reality because the 262s were incredibly rare. I mean, they only made 250 of them.
Oh yeah.
Right.
No, actually, that's not true. They made 1,500 of them, but there were about, let's say, 300 in combat. Uh, it was exceptionally rare, and it was, well, pants. It exploded all the time. It was basically a prototype web, a bit like the Comet, but slightly better.
Sorry, I'm thinking of the Rustal X4.
Ah, okay. Right.
Okay.
It was wire guided. Sorry, I got things confused.
That's
But,
one that has like the wooden wings, right?
Yeah, and it's got the little like knobs on the end of it. It looks like a Buck Rogers ship.
Yeah.
My favorite of all these is it's not really air to air, but I have to tell the story because we're chatting about this. The Schleppgrat, which was basically you got initially, because it's Germany and it's Nazi Germany, they got a 500-kilogram bomb, and they went 1,000-kilogram bomb, and then they went a 2,000-kilogram bomb, and they attached it to, well, there's no other to describe it. It's a tow bar. It's a tow bar with a V1 wing on the back. You go and look this up, right? So it's called the Schleppgrat, and go look this fucker up. And they put it behind a 262 with a little V1 like flying bomb pair of wings on the top of it, and flew it behind the 262, and then they wondered why it was dangerous. And you're flying your 262 along, which has been built by slave labor, most of whom are not your greatest fans, and weirdly your electrics regularly failed, and they decided to abandon the trials after they had to land a 2,000-kilogram bomb behind a 262, which then scraped across the runway and somehow
Christ
didn't
alive.
explode. And they went, maybe we could find another way.
That's funny.
That's a mess.
That's
Absolute
what happens
mess.
when the
Insane.
slaves building your bombs, don't want to go off either.
Yeah, you're going to get your nice man who's been trapped in a concentration camp for 3 years and somehow survived, and you go, could you please build this really complicated piece of electrical kit? Well, his response is going to be, certainly, mein Führer, no problem at all. Oh dear, I slipped with a soldering iron. Guess what? Your button doesn't work. How do you like that, you Nazi ass?
Based.
It's pretty funny.
Some of the sabotage that went on in the concentration camps, I mean, seriously, the guys...
Oh,
guts,
my
real
Von
guts.
Braun diss track is going to be so awesome when I finally release it, like 2 years from now. It's a big project because, like, that man was an absolute piece of shit, and
God, yeah.
he was not the father of modern American rocketry. I'm just saying he was very good at talking to Disney, whereas Carol Bossart, who is a Belgian expat, he was the one who actually developed the Atlas rocket who got us into orbit. He was very involved in our Saturn V program and everything. A lot of his work is very classified, though, because he focused more on the military aspect of it. And he envisioned a ballistic missile that could hit Germany by 1944.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Which ended up becoming the Atlas.
Interesting. That's cool.
That's a really interesting thing. So I wasn't aware of that, but if you look at the general arc of lots of conversations online about German technological advances, and the ME-262 is the classic case in point.
Mm-hmm.
If that had been in development on the Allies' side, there is no way that it would have ever seen combat. It was an act of desperate. Well, it just wouldn't have done, right? It would have been.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Gloucester Meteor was not as quick, and it could not dive as fast, and they did not put it into frontline fighting because it wasn't ready. I mean, It could have been made ready, and it did make some kills on V1s, and it was ready earlier than the 262, but it was not needed. But in Germany, of course, you had to go and rely on these Wunderwaffen to go and try and win the war, which he was never going to be able to do. And so you get things like the idea of rocketry, and it becomes an important psychological weapon. But in terms of effectiveness, they were all shit. I mean, they're all crap.
Like we even made sure to like hold off on releasing the P-80 into the ETO until 45. Like we sent them over to Italy, and we had 2 in England because we wanted to do some like trial overseas service in a closed environment.
And we knew the 59 wasn't anywhere near ready for combat.
Right. Yeah, we fucked up with that with the Bell thing, but the P-80 I think one of them was lost in training over in England, but the two in Italy actually did some combat air patrols, like in the tail end of 45, but they just didn't run into anything.
Yeah.
They just didn't
And-
see any combat, which,
Realistically,
You know.
if the Germans suddenly turned up with thousands of T-62s, then both the Americans and the British would have taken the Gloucester Meteor and just built it. And that was
Oh,
the
yeah.
joy of American production capabilities. We could have said, just build this bastard, build as many of them as you can. If we'd had to do it,
Right.
it could have been done.
right.
Didn't have
Yeah.
to do it.
If it came to it, like we like to joke about, like, Luft 46 and Luft 47, and say like, oh yeah, what kind of cool shit would Germany have had in 46 and 47? We would have had literal ballistic missiles flying over into Germany from the continental US. We would have had the P-80 in full production. The Gloucester Meteor would have been running train in Europe, and it was just going to be a matter of time. Like, I don't care what kind of V-tailed 262s you would have had with ejection seats. It was over.
It was done. It was absolutely done. And
Yeah.
I mean, let's be really, really clear, right? I mean, if you take a 262 and you look at all of the features of the 262 and what made it to, for example, the early model MiGs and well, take the Sabre, right? How much of a 262 is in a Sabre? It has a swept wing. That's it.
That's about it.
That's,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
encouraging. And the reason it had a swept wing was because the Jumo engines that they were planning to put in were originally BMW engines, so they didn't know how heavy they were going to be, so they had to sweep the wing to put weight in it so that
Yep.
it could cope with an extra weight. It had nothing at all to do with its transonic capabilities. It was entirely because of weight. They lucked into that design, and the Sabre had a different angle on its wing because that was better for high-speed fighting. Because the Americans looked at it and went, "That's shit. We can do better."
I mean, it was even
And
so
it would-
good the British adopted it later. The Canadair
Well, I
Sabre.
mean, the Canadians. Let's be clear.
Well,
we know
I
that-
mean, it did have a Rolls Royce in it. so
They had
fair
the
enough.
they had that one concept, the Huckabine, right? The one that had a swept wing and like a tall.
Oh
T-
yeah, yeah. The TA 153, 183.
Yeah.
Yes, that was interesting. People like to say that became MiG 15, but I have never seen any documentation proving that.
Also, like if you, I mean, and this is the whole aside, right? But if you get into where did all these crazy designs come from, a lot of them came out of the fact that between the wars, obviously Germany wasn't allowed to develop piston engine aircraft, so they looked for alternatives, which is why they had a rocket and a jet program early because
Yeah.
they couldn't be pistons.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
were
so-
like
They were
that's
coping.
the reason why rockets exist was because they couldn't develop artillery. So like
Yeah.
we're all like
Yeah.
loopholes for them.
Yeah, and so all those designs that you see appearing at the end of the war came out of the pre-war development plans. And guess what? By that point, technology has moved on 6 years, except it hadn't in Nazi Germany because the Nazis and the bellends, and they decided to develop this stuff which made a lot of noise and looked cool, but didn't do a great deal. I mean, that's fundamentally the Wunderwaffen, and frankly, God bless them for doing that because it shaved 6 to 8 months off the war, but that's all it did.
Yeah. So about Masters of the Air.
Sorry, mate. Sorry. we got
No.
completely tangent, right?
This is all very relevant, I think, for later. Like, if I know where the series is going to, I think we'll be seeing a lot of this. But
Well, so in the opening sequence, we see P-40s, which
Red Tails.
I'm assuming have to do with the Tuskegee Airmen.
Yep.
So they'll hopefully atone for the sins of Red Tails in an episode because as far as I'm concerned, the 8th Air Force never flew with the 332nd Fighter Squadron, right?
So we see in the tail end of episode 2, they're going to go on a mission that's going to end them up in North Africa, which I'm pretty sure did happen. I need to fact check that, but
There's Regensburg, which is the other half of the Schweinfurt missions.
Oh, okay.
so that means that would
So
have
they
put
had
them in
nothing
the
to do with-
MTO.
I'd love to say that it has something to do with Tuskegee Airmen, but it didn't.
Okay.
Tuskegee Airmen were flying out of Foggia, which was in southern Italy, which is a little bit later.
Right.
So are you thinking they'll do like a side story thing?
I
for
think
the
it'll be a
episodes?
side story, yeah.
I kind
Okay.
of, forgive me, guys. I kind of hope, from a narrative point of view, that they don't. There is a really serious point, which is that and I appreciate I'm talking to my American friends here, so please don't get cross with me. But
No, not at all.
there's a really serious point that almost exclusively you can take the Tuskegee Airmen and you can go, great, that's a sign of racial equality and the rest of it. The 8th Air Force and the Air Force setup generally was fundamentally racist. I mean, just completely racist.
Well, yeah, I
You
mean, we
could
weren't integrated yet. We were segregated
not at
still.
all,
Like
not
that.
at all. And I kind of think if you suddenly bring the Tuskegee Airmen in and you sort of go, oh, look at this, you're sort of missing the point historically, because those guys came in and they were building air bases and
Yeah.
they were providing logistics, but they were never given anything close to equality. And the story of the Tuskegee Airmen is a good one because it needs to be told and it's important, but it has to be set in the context of just how full of tension that was. And the beginning of the civil rights movement comes out of the war, because you've got
Right.
a bunch of guys that were sent over to Europe, they did a job for the US, and they came back home and were treated like shit.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a very specific thing too, because the ETO, flying out of England and all that had nothing to do with where the Tuskegee Airmen were. Like, they were
Airbase had
down
no,
in the
yeah,
Mediterranean. Yeah, and
I'm telling you, it's not anywhere near England.
yeah, no,
Interesting.
it's not. So I'm very curious how they're going to actually depict that.
which
And,
which
cover it.
makes me feel like it's going to be a side story.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and that's
so there's
fine.
no
It needs to
there's
be
not
done.
really any crossover. But otherwise, no, I'm agreeing with you here, because I doubt there was ever a racist bomber crewman who was rescued by a red-tailed Mustang and stopped saying the N-word. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Sure.
And there are a number of cases. I say a number, I can think of a couple, and I will get the dates wrong, and it's important that I don't, so I won't name them because I'll get it slightly wrong. But there are at least 2 occasions when actual violence broke out because of the contrast between the way that the Brits treated the black American troops and the way that their own forces treated them.
Damn.
And the Brits were not free of racism, far from it. I don't want to
Sure.
paint the UK as some halcyon land, but we don't have that same cultural approach, and particularly not. You're within living memory of the Civil War. Slavery. The guys that were coming over to build the airfields, their fathers, not their grandfathers, but their fathers might have been involved in being kids as slaves. It's not
Right.
that far out. It's, well, actually, maybe okay, their granddads, because it's 1860s, but it's
Yeah.
not that far out of memory, right? And it's still a thing. Whereas it just wasn't ever a thing in Britain. Yes, we had dominions in Jamaica, and there were lots of slaves in the Caribbean, and there were bad situations
Bermuda.
going on in Africa, but there weren't that many black folks living in the UK. There were some, quite a few, but not. It wasn't a mainstream thing. And so you didn't have that institutional bit. So when Southern officers would come into a pub and find black troops drinking in that pub, the local Brits are like, yeah, fine, whatever. They're Americans.
Yeah.
They're not black, they're just Americans. And then you get a Southern officer coming in going, get out. And it led to violence.
Right.
And what's interesting is in World War II specifically, the British Army wasn't segregated. Like there were Asian troops, there were African troops. They wouldn't have been super common, but they weren't put into their own units, like segregated from the rest of the white units.
Different segregation, right? Because the British troops were set up so that you had officers would be white,
Okay,
and NCOs and down would be, to use the term for the time, coloured, and that could mean not British. And so it's racist in a different way. It's still racist, but in a different way.
it's a touchy subject, but it's going to be covered in the series, and I do
You're
look forward to
interested
how
what
they're
doing.
yeah I'm down to see what they're gonna come up with, and we'll see. Like we didn't actually desegregate in the U.S. military until Korea. Obviously, there was still racism involved, but it was a touchy thing, and
It still is, right? I mean, and
yeah,
the three of
yeah,
us are white guys having a chat about
yeah,
black history, and I think it's an important thing to acknowledge that we recognise that we don't understand the challenges which that still
exactly.
presents as history to people today. I'd just like to kind of, I don't know, doff my cap, frankly, to particularly black troops that came over and did the grunt work and enabled a lot of what we talk about, right? Because it takes about roughly 1,000 people on the ground to put one guy in the air, even at this point.
Oh yeah,
And a lot of them were coloured troops. And I think the series has done such a lovely job of touching on lots of historical stuff. I think they've done a really, really nice job of getting it together. I hope they get that right too.
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
there is a story to be told, and there is a way that they can tell it and have it make sense within the canon of Masters of the Air, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
It'll just be like the question is whether or not they will execute it like so.
Yeah, and it'll be. I can tell you this much: it'll be better than a certain project in 2012.
Like, there's a whole fun thing which I would love. I don't know if they'll cover it, but in the book they do, which is about the guys that were building the airfields.
Mhm.
Because if you think about that ramping we talked about, like how fast you grow this out and how do you do it so quickly? Well, one of the things you've clearly got to have is bases, and initially they're RAF built, but that's not going to be quick enough. So I want to say 135,000 US AAF troops came over to build the air bases, and these guys were working 24 hours a day.
Oh, yeah.
Continual shifts to lay concrete, to flatten ground, to build the Quonset huts, to build the operating centers, to build the radar, and all the stuff that needed to go on to get it done. And that in and of itself, it's not as dramatic as somebody shooting at you, but by God, those guys worked hard.
Oh, yes, they did. Yes, they did. So we're about an hour and 20 or so in. Obviously, it'll be a lot shorter after I edit this, but do you guys have any final statements on the show itself? Like, Jordan?
I think it's very much gearing up to be the finest depiction of like bomber crews, of American bomber crews specifically in World War II, that we're going to see in a long time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like a lightning round of other movies that have touched this, right? Like obviously you have 12 O'Clock High about the TV show and the movie. You've got Memphis Belle, which we talked about already. You have the Harrison Ford movie that nobody watched called Hanover Street, which was about 25s.
I've not seen that yet.
Are you familiar with it, Lord Hart Thrasher?
No, never heard of it.
Yeah, so it's about a beat. So he plays. I believe this movie came out in '78 or '79. It was a little bit after he played Han Solo in Star Wars, but he plays American pilot who flies B-25s. He's based in the UK, meets a British woman and falls in love, and has a romance, etc. But the British lady is actually like married to this British intelligence guy, who I guess like in the climax of the movie, Harrison Ford is picked to like fly a secret mission to like drop this guy off behind an enemy line or something, and yeah.
Over sexed and over here, as we used to say.
yeah,
that's right.
So there's that, right? And then you have Catch 22, both the original movie that has like all the B-25s, and you have the newer show that came out on Hulu,
Right.
which if you haven't seen that, I thought it was fun.
Okay.
And now we have Masters of the Air. Oh, sorry, shoot, there was that one movie that had a B-24 crew that got shot down.
Yeah, Unbroken.
Yeah,
yeah.
The B-24 sequence in that I thought was actually pretty good.
So the guy, I forget his name offhand, but he was originally from my hometown.
No way.
In Western New York, and then he moved to LA.
Oh wow, okay.
California, yeah. He's kind of a local guy, if I'm not mistaken.
It's funny because you made that same journey.
You know what? You're right, actually. I was not tortured in the Pacific, but yes.
I'm sure we can arrange it if you want. I mean,
oh, yeah. We can all go to Hawaii and have a meetup.
beat the crap out of Falcon. Yeah, sure. I'm down. I've always wanted to go to Hawaii.
Absolutely, but like as whereas Masters of the Air fits in, I believe so far the first 2 episodes have been really good.
Yeah,
I'm excited for the next ones, and like just the scale of the production. Like you mentioned earlier about how in the costume designer had to do 3,000. She stopped counting after 3,000 costumes.
Yeah,
and all these sets are fully fleshed out, and it feels like there was a sequence that they were racing bicycles like on the base.
Yeah,
if you guys remember, and like just like the scale of the actual base, they had to have built like an actual facsimile of an 8th Air Force base that the actors would spend a lot of time on, maybe even live on, and like to really feel immersed with everything. And like just that scale of production, I thought was really, really cool and felt incredibly authentic.
How about you, my lord?
I mean, I guess I would say my gripe with it was the sequence of the RAF, which will not come as any surprise.
Oh,
There's a bit
yes.
where they wind up having a punch up in a pub, and you're like, guys, the bomber crews from both the RAF and the USAAF actually got on really well. The surprising bit about the whole war is, despite their fundamental differences on how well they got on with one another. Ira Aker lived with Harris, with Bomber Harris, for a period of time. They got on really well, and there were tensions between the two sides, but they weren't, by and large, they weren't expressed operationally, and you just really did not get RAF and USAAF troops fighting with one another. They just didn't do that. They got on fantastically well. We were incredibly grateful to have had their support and their help, and there was really very little tension. In the army, it's slightly different, but even there, it was very minimal. In the air, we disagreed on the mechanics of how, but we certainly didn't disagree with one another. We wanted to beat the fucking Nazis, right? So that was a little bit, oh God, guys, really, do we have to do this bit? And I was a bit disappointed by that. I'm just, the kernel of the 8th Air Force fighter wings was based off the Eagle squadrons, who were Americans who come over and volunteered to come and fly for the RAF. And so initially, there were 3 squadrons of RAF in a typical American style. They, of course, had to have extra numbers added to them to make them hundreds of things rather than 67 or whatever. I can't remember the precise numbers, but I think they added at least 200 to every one just to make sure they sounded bigger, because it's America, of course it is. But they were, US citizens who'd come and flown for the RAF, who then became the kernel of the RAF. By kernel, I mean the central point of the 8th Air Force fighter wing. There were 3 squadrons, and they had Spitfires initially. And when the US joined the war, they repainted their aircraft and put the American Randalls on them. Happy days. And they flew those for like 6 months. It was an incredibly close-knit community of individuals trying to fight this war. They're fighting it a different way, but it was really very harmonious. It genuinely didn't get to the point where they started to punch one another in pubs. Yeah, that was a little frustrating, but I think they got so much stuff right. I think they got so much stuff right in this, and I'm excited to see what they do next.
Well, the one thing I'll say is we both have red, white, and blue in our flags.
and whilst you might have rejected the king, and you'll come back in the end, I'm sure.
Well, I'm hanging out with a lord right now, so you might not be wrong.
When the Donald comes a calling, you come back again. We'll get you.
Me and Hellion do want to go out there eventually and have a little excursion, maybe for our honeymoon. But we'll be sure to give you a call.
Oh, give us a shout, man. I'd love to see you. Always. Yeah. You're very welcome.
Well, thank you. I think that being said, we'll call it here, and we'll probably do another one of these after episode 4 or 5 comes out. Just kind of recap. We did get a little off topic. That's okay. We still,
sorry.
No. Do not apologize. It was all in the same theater, and I feel like this series is going to be good. I really enjoy it. The direction has been very good. Obviously, the sound design and the effects are top notch. If you have not seen the first 2 episodes of Masters of the Air yet, please do yourself a favor and watch it, especially if you're an aviation or history enthusiast. You will not regret it.
And read the book. Go read the book.
Yes.
Because the book is fantastic.
I plan on reading the book afterwards, just so I don't spoil myself, but I do have a copy of it on standby.
I'll give you one minor spoiler, which is Buck and Bucky are not central characters.
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
You mean they're not central characters in the book, right?
Yeah, they're not going to be central characters of the series either. 14% of crews that flew before D-Day completed their tour. So the rest did
14. One
14 per,
1
Holy-
4.
Holy shit.
Holy shit. 73% of crews were killed or captured.
absolutely unreal.
There's
So
some
yeah,
stuff you can say.
don't get your hopes up, folks. Buck and Bucky might have some bad times ahead.
I don't have strong vibes for them, my friends. I think
No spoilers because statistics have been out for 80 years now. I
Yeah.
guess like
Sorry, I didn't mean to give the game away there. Sorry, apologies.
our main hero's chance of slipping through unscathed is apparently 14%.
14%. I don't like his
One
chances.
that's a 1-4, folks, not a 4-0.
Well, we'll see y'all next time. Thanks for joining us.